Hello, it's Thursday, June 22nd, 2017. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO-Headline News. Tonight there's a treat in the sky, according to the folks at earthsky.org. If we've got dark skies, we ought to be able to pick out the constellation Draco the Dragon as it winds around the North Star Polaris. And how to do this? Well, first find the Big Dipper. It's going to be high in the north on these June evenings. And the two outer stars of the Dipper's bowl point to Polaris, the North Star, which this broadcaster was lucky enough to see last night with binoculars, and it marks the end of the Little Dipper's handle. Yep, the Little Dipper is relatively faint. If you can find both Dippers, then your sky is indeed pretty dark, and you're going to need that to see Draco. You'll have to let your eyes and imagination drift a bit to see the entire winding shape of the dragon in the northern heavens. But if you can find both of those Dippers, it's going to be fairly easy then to pick out another noteworthy star in Draco. It's a star called Thuban, or Thuban. It's spelled Thuban. And the way to find Thuban is by remembering it's between the Big and Little Dippers. That's a famous star, famous for having served as a pole star back in the day, 3000 BC, that is. This date coincides with the beginning of the building of the pyramids in Egypt. It's said that the descending passage of the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza was built to point directly at Thuban. So our ancestors knew and celebrated this star. And also two more stars, Eltinin and Rastaban, lie ahead of Draco. They serve to represent the dragon's eyes. So here's the bottom line. You'll have to let your eyes and imagination drift a bit to see the entire winding shape of Draco the Dragon in tonight's northern sky. Good luck. Here's something that's been making the rounds of the internet. It's a photo. Yep, this is radio, but you can find links to that photo later at ufo-headline-news.com. Here is the headline. Mars orbiting space camera captures rover on surface. This gets a byline for Alana Glowatz, who writes it for the International Business Times. NASA released a photo this week that could be the most meta thing that's ever happened on Mars. The spacecraft orbiting the planet snapped a picture of the rover exploring the surface. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter used its powerful telescope from the High-Resolution Imaging Science Experiment, otherwise known as HiRISE. It captured the image of the Curiosity rover handling the rough terrain of Mount Sharp. The blue dot of Curiosity stands out against the reds and tans of the area's rocks and sand. It wasn't the first time the orbiter's HiRISE camera captured Curiosity down below. NASA said this has happened a few times a year since the rover landed near Mount Sharp almost 5 years ago. Curiosity, scale-wise about the size of a car, is ascending Mount Sharp as it investigates the soil on Mars for clues about the environment it once hosted and whether or not it could have supported alien life. Scientists have already started analyzing samples taken from the lower levels of Mount Sharp. They show a diverse environment that evolved over time. The lowest levels of Mount Sharp are made of sediment, which accumulated in the earliest of the mountain's history while the area was underwater. The rover sampled soil from there that had lots of iron and magnesium, rock that's similar to the volcanic kind, like we'd find in Hawaii today, and that suggests a similar source. At higher elevations of Mount Sharp, there were some minerals that would have accumulated in more acidic water, and others that would have built up in water with a more neutral pH level, an example of the way the environment changed in this location over time. The water with the more natural pH would have been most comfortable for alien life to form and thrive, since it's similar to what we'd find on Earth today. Although more acidic water doesn't rule out extraterrestrials. In fact, recent research has shown that early life on Earth could have evolved in more acidic oceans. Before it began its trek up Mount Sharp, Curiosity examined the sand dunes in that area to learn more about environmental conditions on Mars, such as wind. The rover rock took soil samples to see how the grains and minerals had been organized by the blowing wind, and took a closer look at the physical characteristics of these sand dunes, which vary from spot to spot. Last month, Curiosity passed through an area with linear sand dunes, where the peaks in the sand run in lines. But shortly before that, and slightly farther away from the base of Mount Sharp, it rolled through a place where the dunes were shaped like crescents. Scientists are hoping to use data the rover collected to learn more about the complex wind patterns that would create such varying conditions. The data includes photos of the landscape taken over time as the winds move soil along. Curiosity does have a wind detection device as part of its onboard weather instruments, but it doesn't work. Moving forward, here's a headline: New Hall of Distant Worlds casts doubt on Planet 9. It grieves us to read this headline. It's a byline for Joshua Sokol, who writes it for sciencemag.org. And here we go. In early 2016, astronomers made a stunning claim. A giant planet was patrolling the farthest reaches of our solar system. Planet 9, as they called it, was too far away to see directly. So its existence was inferred from the way its gravity had herded 6 distant icy worlds into clustered orbits. Since then, the case for Planet 9 has been bolstered by other evidence, such as a peculiar tilt to the sun's spin axis, along with a few more of these strange objects. They have elongated orbits of more than 4,000 years, and they never come closer to the sun than Neptune. Now, a survey has found 4 more of these extreme bodies. The problem: they don't display the telltale clustering, and that's a substantial blow for Planet 9 enthusiasts. Says Corey Shankman, an astronomer at the University of Victoria in Canada and a member of something called the Outer Solar System Origins Survey. He said, quote, "We find no evidence of the orbit clustering needed for the Planet 9 hypothesis in our fully independent survey," end quotes. This survey, which since 2013 has found more than 800 objects out near Neptune using the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope in Hawaii. Here's a quote from Scott Shepard, an astronomer at the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, D.C., quote, "I think it's great work, and it's exciting to keep finding these," end quotes. Shepard was among the first to suspect a large planet in the distant solar system, but he says 3 of the 4 new objects do have clustered orbits consistent with a Planet 9, and so the debate continues. The 4th, an object called 2015 GT50, seems to skew this entire set of worlds toward a random distribution. But that isn't necessarily a knockout blow, says Shepard. Quote, "We always expected that there would be some that don't fit in," end quotes. The team says any apparent clustering in their new objects is likely to be the result of bias in the survey. Weather patterns and the location of this telescope, for instance, determine what areas of the sky it can look at and when. It's also harder to see faint solar system objects in bright areas on the sky, such as the galactic center. Such biases make the Outer Solar System Origins survey more likely to find objects in regions that support the Planet 9 hypothesis, and that's according to team member Michelle Bannister. She's an astronomer at Queen's University, Belfast, in the United Kingdom. When the team corrects this effect, the apparent clustering vanishes. By contrast, says another team member, many details of the surveys behind the original 6 objects are unpublished, and that makes it impossible to understand these biases. That argument doesn't impress Mike Brown, a familiar name. He's an astronomer at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, Caltech, and along with Caltech colleague Konstantin Batygin, they catapulted Planet 9 into the mainstream with their bold claim, which was, quote, "Their main conclusion is that their observations are hopelessly biased, and it's true," he says, end quotes. But by then they make a leap of faith that everybody else's must be biased too, end quotes. For Brown, any basis in the hodgepodge of surveys that found the earlier objects ought to average out. That would make the clustering real, whether caused by Planet 9 or not. So far, astronomers have found only a dozen of the most distant probes of Planet Nine's supposed sphere of influence. Finding more objects could help settle this question. And so could the most direct kind of evidence, an actual image of Planet Nine, which other surveys are hoping to capture. It says Konstantin Batigan, quote, "Perhaps the most attractive thing about Planet Nine hypothesis is that it has a well-defined observational resolution. It's either there or it's not," end quotes. To be continued. And here at UFO Headline News on Inception Radio Network, we will keep you in the loop. From mysteries in space to, well, yet more mysteries in space, here's this headline by Joshua Sokol, who writes it for newscientist.com. Buckyballs mysteriously show up in cold space and warp starlight. Greedy black holes, giant lava lakes, stars too big to exist. Even the comparatively small stuff in outer space, like asteroids or geologic features on a world's surface, would effortlessly dwarf you if you stood in front of them in a spacesuit. But on a scale far below the cosmic megafauna is a different world, one of tiny carbon molecules mixing and changing in the void. Its poster child, the charming buckyball, a curious round agglomeration of carbon atoms. This chemical ecosystem can be a nuisance for astronomers because the little black molecules block out parts of the light we see from stars and galaxies. But it's also important on its own. Recent discoveries have shown that the chemical reaction between stars can build the constituents of biological molecules, such as amino acids and sugars. These substances, raining from space, may have contributed to the origin of life on Earth. But these reactions are intricate, they're hard to track, which leaves us searching for beacons, a molecule we understand that could help us navigate through this fog. And this is where the small stuff becomes a big deal. So, as Joshua Sokol writes, hang on as we zoom down. To envision a buckyball bouncing around in outer space, picture it as a little football, 60 atoms of carbon arranged in a rough sphere. By mid-20th century, architect Buckminster Fuller, also called Bucky, hence buckyballs, and others had figured out that a network of pentagons and hexagons would fold into a stable geodesic structure. As it turned out, nature had already come to that same realization. In 1985, Earthbound researchers cooked a disk of graphite, a carbon mineral, in a plasma chamber to recreate the conditions that they would find around a red giant star. To their surprise, they discovered they'd made weird new forms of carbon, buckyballs, and other examples of even larger molecules that looked like carbon cages. They chose to nod to Fuller by calling them fullerenes, thankfully, after first considering names like baleen, spherine, soccerine, and carbo-soccer. But even after astronomers began to look for fullerenes in space, they took 2.5 decades to find. It wasn't until 2010 that a team led by Jan Kami at the University of Western Ontario in Canada found their spectral signatures in the colorful gas around a dying star. Since then, traces of fullerenes have popped up again and again in many different environments. A 2015 paper argued that their presence in the Milky Way might even explain weird spectral features of interstellar space, those certain wavelengths of light from distant stars that are being mysteriously absorbed on their way to us. These features have been unexplained for over a century. And that's not to say that we understand now where fullerenes are coming from. There's plenty of carbon in space, and a heated carbon-rich gas will produce buckyballs and similar molecules because their closed cages, well, those are incredibly stable and resilient. But colder regions of space should, instead, make flat soda ring structures of carbon, with hydrogen atoms around the outside. To get those structures to fold into a cage, you'd need to get rid of the hydrogen. And this could happen either because there were no hydrogens around to begin with, or if those molecules were exposed somehow to ultraviolet light that could bake those hydrogens away. How these processes interact to explain the full spread of interstellar fullerenes isn't clear. But, said Cami, quote, "I've been scratching my head about this for a long time," end quotes. Solving the mystery of this little molecule could have a big payoff. Most of our spectral measurements of carbon molecules floating around in space are a garbled mess. Too many different kinds of other molecules are overlapping, and that makes it hard to understand what's going on. So enter fullerenes with their clear and unique signals, showing us at least one part of the rhythms and reactions of interstellar carbon. And eventually, perhaps we can use them as tracers to understand how prebiotic molecules form in space. That's going to give us lots of hints about our own existence. Like soil bacteria in the savanna, buckyballs might not be as eye-catching as the astronomical titans that tower over them, but try taking them and their relatives away, and we might not be here to appreciate the cosmos in the first place. A possible point to ponder. Speaking of pondering, let's ponder a black triangle sighting in Marbella, Andalusia, Spain, shall we? Courtesy of ufostalker.com. It's got a MUFON case number 84405 for those tracking and identification purposes, hopefully. The date of this sighting is June 15th, 2017. It got a next day report. Here's the summary. At around 12:40 a.m., I saw 3 lights changing pattern and direction, forming a triangle above the sea. Sighting specifics offer a witness-reported viewing distance unknown, the altitude 500 feet or less. The duration of this sighting was 20 minutes, and in spite of that length of time, the object features are reported as unknown. Its flight path, a path and then hovering, and this object obviously was shaped like a triangle. Here's the account. On the 15th of June, at about 12:40 a.m. at night, I looked outside my window to the sea and saw the light blinking every 2 seconds. At first I thought it was an airplane, so I opened my app. It's called Flight Trader 24 app, and tracked planes. But there were no planes above this area. All right, I thought, and I grabbed my binoculars to look at these lights. I was shocked when I saw actually not 1, but 3 of these lights through binoculars. They formed a triangle. One of these lights was yellow, the other 2 were reddish or greenish color, and they kept moving to the left and then back to the right. Sometimes this object would just sit in the sky at one spot for about a minute. I watched these lights, this thing, flying for about 20 minutes or so, and then they disappeared. Interesting, again, a large body of water and a UFO. Our next sighting back in the U.S. of A., Pinehurst, North Carolina. And this sighting comes by way of UFOs Northwest, that most excellent site maintained by William Puckett. Here's the headline: Very bright light falls from the sky. The date of this sighting is June 18th, 2017. It took place at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. According to the Google map that accompanies this sighting report, it looks as though Pinehurst, North Carolina, is north and to the west of the city of Fayetteville, North Carolina. So here's the account. I was beginning my shift as security officer. It was June 18th, 2017, at approximately 23:30 hours. As I was driving down Carolina Vista Drive, away from the Carolina Hotel, I saw a bright light at a very far distance away. This light seemed to be coming down at an acute angle. It was kind of free-falling at about a 45-degree angle. It kept its level of light intensity constant during this fall. It wasn't twinkling. It wasn't fading as a meteor would. And this object had no light tail. I'm 58 years old, and I've seen many meteors in my life, so I know that this was not any meteor. It looked like an aircraft of some kind, and I immediately thought to myself, he's got to pull out quick or he's going to crash. Since I was in my vehicle, I heard no sound after this object fell over the horizon. I've never seen anything like this, ever. Good news, it wasn't an airplane. There was no crash. But there was no sound and no tail like a meteor. Let's zip up to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for this reporting of a black triangle sighting. MUFON case number 84533. Date of this sighting 6/21/2017. Date submitted 6/22/2017. Here's the summary. Lights I observed from my porch, and then I moved to a better vantage point. There's video with this. You're probably going to want to check that out, gentle listeners. You can find links later at ufo-headline-news.com. And oh yeah, we're available on YouTube these days. Back to the sighting specifics. Viewing distance 501 feet to 1 mile, eventually out over 1 mile. The altitude was over 500 feet, no cloud cover. This sighting duration lasted 10 minutes, and the object featured wings. Its flight path featured hovering and then a straight path, and yep, shaped like a triangle it was. And the sighting seemed to go something like this. I was sitting on my porch around 10:20 p.m. when I saw 2 strange lights. These lights were stationary, they weren't moving. I began videotaping them, and then one appeared to move a little. I decided to move to a clearing down the street and realized there were 3 of these lights then, and I again began filming. The furthest light to the right appeared to start moving up and to the right. I managed to get a short video from beneath this object, but I sort of fumbled at first, and so I ended up taking a picture instead of a recorded video. But then I went back to these other 2 lights. They remained stationary for some time. The light on the left began moving to the left, moving in a straight line, and then it flew almost over my head, and I managed to get a brief video of that as well. Video, some sort of evidence, even evidence on a personal level. You know you saw that because here's the footage. Not too far away from Edgewater, New Jersey, so let's look at this sighting, shall we? It's MUFON case number 84528. It happened on the 18th of June this year, didn't get reported till the 21st of June. Our reporting witness has a summary that's just 1 word long. That word, fascinating. There are photos submitted with this account. Under sighting specifics, the viewing distance is listed as over 1 mile initially, eventually unknown. The altitude over 500 feet, and there was cloud cover. The sighting duration 1 hour. The object features other and unknown. Its flight path was stationary and then a straight line path. And this object was shaped like a disc. At the time of this sighting over Edgewater, New Jersey, the maximum temperature on the ground was 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 29 degrees Celsius. The minimum temperature, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 degrees Celsius. The maximum visibility at this point was 10 miles, 16 kilometers, dropping down to a 2-mile, 2-kilometer minimum. Here's the account. It's in points 1 through 6, so here we go. Point 1. I was home at the time and went out to my balcony to get some fresh air. Point 2. This thing would move side to side or front to back. Also, the sky was clear, clean. Point 3. At first, I thought this was an airplane or a helicopter, but seconds later, that possibility went out the window, and then I thought I could possibly be seeing a drone or a star, but that weird pattern of movement made it clear that it wasn't those objects. Point 4. At first, this object was hovering for a few minutes, and it looked like that classic flying saucer disc. But while hovering, it started to move in a circle motion, which made this then look like a portal or some white hole. Last but not least, in point 4, its minor movement would take it west and north, or in other words, descent and ascent. Point 5. While watching the object, I got goosebumps. And also, quite randomly, my 3 cats came to me at that same time. The birds began singing and flying in the yard. Point 6. I went inside for some orange juice, and when I went outside again, this was already gone. It left no trail. And here's the point where we sing happy trails to you, gentle listeners, at least for today. We've got to gallop out of here now because...